Welcome and thank you for coming to help scatter David's ashes in the wood. A little bit about David's life. David was born in Minchel on the 13th of February 1938, son of Sam and Joyce, eldest brother to Tuffy, Stephen and Pell. He didn't have an illustrious academic start, getting a single O-level in woodwork. Probably at the behest of his godfather, Uncle Sonny, David left school to join the police cadets in London, living in Barnes with Sonny and Maggie. If he had been guaranteed a place on the River Police, maybe he would have elected to stay with the Metropolitan Police. Instead, he signed up for 3 years of national service, 1 year more than the obligatory 2 years. This gave him slightly better pay and opportunities. His foreign posting would have been to Singapore had he not broken an arm in a motorcycle accident and been delayed in the UK. Instead, he ended up in Cyprus for 2.5 years. It was here he started playing jazz with a borrowed E-flat tuba. He also entered a suggestion box type competition, his great idea being a torch strapped to a Sten gun, like an optical sight with the torch lighting where the bullets would go. The idea was dismissed by his commanding officer as ridiculous, but it has, of course, become regularly used as laser sights have developed. His look here is one I am very used to. This is bloody obvious, so why do I need to explain it? A love of photography and imagery is evident in his work from this period, and what must have seemed a great idea at the time was to swap his good camera for a 1933 Bullnose Austin 7. Maybe this is not such a great idea when you are about to undertake the drive from Cyprus to Battersea. Quite a journey now, let alone then. This illustrates perfectly David's thirst for knowledge and experience, which he demonstrated all his life. Back in the UK, and David started work at Eastern Electricity Board, quite literally at the bottom, digging post holes. Soon after playing a borrowed tuba in a pickup band or listening to jazz in Ipswich, he heard that Tucker Smith was forming a band and they needed a trombone player. It's easy to imagine him thinking, I could have a go at that. So Stan, the bass player, took him to the music store to get a trombone. On hire purchase, of course, because the trip home from Cyprus had left him broke. Mac, who was in that first band with David, is still going strong and will play for us now.
Playing that HP trombone at Holton St Mary Village Hall is where Dad first set eyes on Mum. It must have gone well because after a few years of courtship, they married in 1962 and soon after moved into a small rented house in Finningham. The neighbouring village, Gislingham, had a silver band and the band leader soon came a-calling, having heard that Dad played. Dad explained that he couldn't read music, but was still encouraged to go and practice the next night. He picked up the tunes very quickly, entirely by ear, and stayed for the next 4 years, always with the sheets on his instruments for show, even though he couldn't read them. I was born at that small cottage in Finningham in 1966, something that has been pointed out every time that we have driven past it in the last 50-odd years. Always striving for more and the best for their new family, Mum and Dad bought Elm Tree House, Silver Street, here in Old Newton in 1968. Like so many similar properties at the time, it was pretty tumble down and in need of total renovation. Having no building experience, it was another prime have-a-go project, and with the assistance of his father, brothers and mates, Dad's taught himself how to rebuild houses too. Shortly after moving into Elm Tree House, Joe was born in 1968. My earliest memories are of Elm Tree House and Dad always working long hours on the board, longer hours on the house, and somehow fitting in visits to Grandad and his shed, playing rugby, playing gigs, some of which we were lucky enough to attend, with Mum always telling us to clap your father. He built us the tree house, put up the death slide rope in the back garden, hung the rope swings out of the tree at the bottom of the garden, Mum and Joe seen here. Our childhood was idyllic, with a freedom unimaginable now. I was filled with wonder at the world Dad was showing me. He was my hero then. He could do anything, fix anything. I wasn't afraid of anything, apart from the Doctor Who monsters, because he wasn't afraid of anything. Whilst Dad and his mate Alan were building the garage, I still wasn't afraid when he put me on one end of a carefully balanced scaffold plank and jumped from a reasonably great height onto the other. Fear did start to develop in me as I reached the zenith of my short flight and realised just how high I'd been propelled. My wrist broke my fall, and the fall broke it. Another example of him just trying stuff, just to see what happens, pushing the envelope. I don't think Mum spoke to him for about a week, though. From school, he was a keen rugby player and kept playing throughout the army and at home in Suffolk. He was most disgruntled that I was born on a Saturday afternoon and he had to miss a game. Another Saturday afternoon, he came home with a broken nose and was told by Mum to go to A&E to get it fixed. Instead, he went off to play for the Tom Collins band, which was obviously far more important. Whilst working on Elm Tree House, he had a sharp pain in the chest, which he of course shrugged off and carried on working. He did eventually go to the doctor and then on to hospital, where he was told that he'd had a heart attack and now had angina. So he stopped playing rugby. This made a tiny sliver of time available, which he dedicated to boats. He had loved boats since his time on the Thames with the River Police. He started building Bonzo in 1980 with a set of home-build plans from his mate Ginger of Bungay Riverside Shuffle fame. He had the plans, a heap of plywood, and a lot of hope. And Bonzo served us well until the late 80s when he traded her in for a Hirondelle catamaran. Through his 34 years at the Eastern Electricity Board, he trained, rose up the polls and through the ranks to become foreman and effectively ran the disc depot. He really loved his work and the men he worked with. During any storm, he would always be waiting by the phone for the call to go and fix the broken lines. He always wanted to be doing his best at anything he applied himself to. When I was working on the Faraday lecture tour in 1992, we were looking for a local crew for the Norwich show to come and assist with loading it all in and out again. The regular agencies did not deal with Norwich, so Dad suggested that he and some of his guys from the disc depot take the day off and come and do the job. Still the hardest working and fastest local crew I've ever worked with. He retired early in 1993 and busied himself for several months in Weymouth fitting out his pride and joy, a brand new 9-metre Cadillac catamaran. Mum named her Rubessa after the beloved grandchildren, Ruby, aged 2, and Bessie, then just a few months. Dad joined Bob Kerr's Whoopee Band in the 90s and toured all over the UK and the continent. In 1997, Elm Tree House was sold and Haddon House bought to embark on his biggest single project, to self-build the anchorage, and what a magnificent place this has turned out to be. Later, the wood was bought as his happy place, to keep as natural woodland in perpetuity. He had such a love of nature because he was such a force of nature. Through all of the above, he would never turn down a gig, jazz, or anything else, if he could possibly find the time and be of use. He ran the local jazz club at Ixworth, where I started my career, recording the gigs on his cassette recorder with all the complicated knobs. That's describing the kit, not the musicians. Another early memory for me is the special treat of staying up late to watch Spike Milligan or Monty Python and being immersed in absurdist lunacy. Another defining feature of my life defined by him. On stage, Dad was Morecambe to Mike Lee's Wise. He was always a smart ass with a wisecrack. Such an amazing sense of humour. Practically all the sympathy cards the family received mentioned this. Even in his last weeks in hospital, when one of the nurses asked him if was diabetic, he replied with a straight face, "No, I'm Church of England." David Turner, an intelligent man. Telegraph cryptic crossword? Not a problem. A funny man. A problem solver. Some, himself included, would call it bodging, but a true engineer, making the best of all the available assets all the time, including time. A front man, but also happy up the rear in support. A self-deprecating man. He referred to his many talents as competent mediocrity. A hard man with a soft heart. A man whose son I am ridiculously proud to be. He definitely had a soft heart with the grandchildren, and now I'm going to hand over to them. Kendra first.